So I think it's about time to start. Um, Good morning and welcome everyone to this webinar on how to master fast prototype testing. My name is Anton Svan. I'm the Country Director for Lean Lab Sweden, and I will be the host for today's webinar. Together I have with me, I have Lotta, my colleague. Hi, Lotta.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. She is our head of customer success. Some of you may know her since before. And she will be the main presenter through the topic of today for prototype testing. Please feel free to use the chat on the right-hand side if you have any questions throughout the webinar. But I think we should get started. To kick things off, I would like to give a short introduction on our continuous learning blueprint, which is sort of the basis of all of our webinars when we are going through the different steps on the development or design process. Today, we are going to focus on the prototyping part of this, and we will start by looking at the definition of what we mean by prototype testing and also walk through some best practices and some examples on how you could use prototype testing in your daily work. But first, let's have a look at why this is important. Companies that are involving their users and customers throughout their development and design processes are seeing 80% better stock performances and 4 times higher conversion rates compared to companies that don't. This is, of course, impressive numbers and also have some negative effects if you are not involving your users on a continuous basis throughout your design or development programs. So look at the negative parts. We can see that there is a cost on people needing to make decisions based on gut feeling or when you lack data can cause a lot of frustration and stress amongst your team. And it's definitely not a situation where you would like to be in when you're walking through your development journeys and improving your products or services. This can then affect or lead down to other things or negative effects like cost on development. Building and maintaining things that people don't want is definitely not a situation where we would like to be in. This then has also an effect on the business overall, the business performance overall, leading to lack in revenue. Churn, more customers are churning and leaving your brand or your proposition for other solutions, declining or decaying customer lifetime values. It's definitely not a situation where you would like to be in as a company. And as an example of this, even a 1% churn could mean millions of lost revenue potential for small and medium-sized software companies. That's quite a significant impact for not involving your customers or users throughout your development and design processes. With that said, let's look into today's topic with the prototype testing and our definition on prototype testing. Lotta, would you take over?
Great, thank you, Anton. So prototype testing, essentially prototype testing is your first concrete way to show your users the intended execution of a feature, a product or service element that you're developing. So it's essentially the first time that you're able to show users more concretely what is it that you're intending to do or develop. So it's really crucial part of the development and testing process to really understand is that execution meeting users' expectations. And thinking about prototype testing today, that's often associated with only doing moderated interviews. so this is the kind of way that most of prototype testing is done today. And what we found is that there's a few drawbacks onto this, only focusing on moderated prototype testing. We see that it's a very time-intensive process for design and development teams, which means in turn that we have a limited number of participants that can take part in the tests. We don't have the time to run large-scale tests for the prototypes. Also means that the number of prototypes tests being done are much smaller in number because of the time-intensive process, which means that we're then not doing the prototype tests as frequently as they should be done when developing products and services, and often ends up being that these tests are only done for large-scale developments, whereas prototype testing should really, in our opinion, also be done for the smaller scale developments and improvements as well. So thinking then about how do we make the prototype testing process faster? How do we ensure that we're able to do the prototype testing more frequently and more effectively across our development projects? So the first thing to remember here is that even before we start a prototype test is to go through the checklist before the test itself. What is our objective and hypothesis regarding the prototype? What is it that we're trying to achieve? What kind of assumptions do we have in terms of how users should interact with the prototype that we have? But also, how big of a deal is what we're developing for the business? These will help determine kind of what type of tests we should be running, but also then identifying who is it that we're developing this for? Who are the target groups for the product, service, or new feature that's being developed or being improved? And this will then also help us determine the research methods used in the prototype test. What is it that we should be testing? What is the best method to answer the questions that we have about the prototype? So this is essentially what you should be doing even before we get into the testing process and thinking about those best practices. Moving on to the best practices of the actual prototype tests. One of the key things to add to your process is adding the unmoderated prototype tests. This doesn't mean we completely forget about the moderated interviews. It just means that we add an additional tool into your toolkit for doing the prototype testing, making it more flexible and adding speed to the testing process by being able to combine both moderated and unmoderated tests in the process. By unmoderated tests, we essentially, for example, mean you could run a survey where you showcase the prototype to your users and ask them to evaluate the prototype based on a few different questions, give feedback on the prototype that way. So it doesn't require live moderation from you, and you're still being able to effectively collect feedback from the prototype that's been developed. A second point in the process in terms of how to make the prototype testing process faster is testing static sketches and creating testing stories. So not always testing a fully fledged functional prototype. For example, for a digital service, a clickable prototype is often what's considered necessary to be able to test the prototype, but actually testing earlier stage prototypes where you still have the ability to show users the concrete example of what the execution could look like or how the feature could work is already a really good way to start and helps you add speed to the process in terms of the prototype itself doesn't have to be developed so far either, and gives you flexibility in terms of making adjustments and improvements and making sure that it's meeting the user's expectations. And with the testing stories here, just to highlight what we mean with that, is essentially kind of, instead of having the clickable prototype for a digital service, for example, describing to the users how the feature is intended to work, giving that additional description and having those visual aids to support that, so that they can grasp what it is going to be intended to do. As a third point, it's important to include test review as part of the prototype testing process. So while this might feel that this actually adds an additional step, but it's going to slow us down, over time, this will actually add speed to your process. And particularly when we're including unmoderated testing as part of the process, it's important to review if the test has worked. Have our users understood the prototype? Have they understood the test that they're taking part in? So validating the data from the test itself, at the same time learning if users have considered the prototype easy to use, have they understood the functionality or the feature of the product. So it's really important to kind of check the validity of your data and also learn from that in terms of what kind of tests work for your product and service, and what kind of questions should you be including in the tests to be able to develop them further, essentially. As a fourth point, we definitely recommend combining both quantitative and qualitative methods into the prototype testing process. This brings speed to the process, essentially going back to kind of the checklist before the test as well. When evaluating what method should be used, what will help us answer those questions, those hypotheses, those objectives, it's important to have a multi-method toolkit in use as part of that. So being able to determine what kind of method will help us answer those questions, which brings us back to why it's important to have both quantitative and qualitative methods. So for quantitative methods, it enables us to more widely validate the prototype itself, testing the ease of use or the improvement onto the user experience. But then for the qualitative side, when we need learnings in terms of how do we optimize it further, how do we ensure that we add value to the different user groups that we have. And as a fifth point, to add speed to your prototype testing process, is having a user advisory group. This is essentially kind of twofold in a sense. If you have a user advisory group ready for your prototype testing, it can help save time in terms of, for example, recruitment as part of the process. It can speed up the testing process in our experience, so make it 3 to 4 times faster overall. But in addition, the user advisory groups helps you with identifying the bias of the participants that are evaluating your prototype, which is crucial for understanding how they're coming into evaluating your prototype in the first place. Are they, for example, for a digital service, are they tech savvy versus non-tech savvy users? Their perspectives will be very different from that side. But also the different user segments that you have, being able to look at different segments and their needs and expectations when it comes to an update or developing a new product or service and testing that prototype. And in our experience, particularly for prototype testing, when you're giving the users a concrete example of what the execution could look like, that understanding that bias becomes even more crucial, so that you're able to put the data into the right context and evaluate it from that perspective. Who is the intended execution really adding value to, and from what perspective are they using that product, service, or feature, for example. So these are essentially the 5 steps that we recommend that you add to your process to give you that additional speed in testing those prototypes and enabling you to do these tests more frequently, ensuring that you have the best.
Lotta left the room, it says. Let's see if she joins anytime soon, or what happens now. I guess we'll pause for a minute and see where if Lola joins for the next few minutes on the webinar. There you are.
Sorry. One of these delightful things of where your browser throws you out altogether.
Yeah, no worries. You went back fast, so that works.
Great. Just kind of as a recap, as I said, not sure where it chucked me out or cut me off, but essentially these are the 5 steps to add to your process to bring that speed and agility into testing your prototypes and enabling you to do it more frequently across the different development initiatives that you have, not just focusing on the large scale improvements, new features or new products altogether, but actually optimizing and testing the development altogether. Great. So next we have a couple of examples with us today. So our first example case, essentially, we're in the process of updating our survey creation menu, but we want to understand how our users are interacting with the current design. So how are they looking at our prototype itself? So essentially, the known are that we've identified usability issues with the current feature and have come up with a solution to improve the experience. But now want to know how our users perceive it. Is it really meeting their expectations? Does it improve the experience? What do the users then expect from that functionality? And one way to approach this and test this to help answer these questions is an unmoderated prototype test. So for example, running a survey between 30 to 150 participants. So again, the unmoderated prototype test here helps us scale when necessary. So we can do wider validation of the prototype itself, helps us understand the ease of use of the functionality. We get understanding of the first impression of what's being developed, but also then possibility to ask for improvement ideas for further development. How do we improve the experience even further? And a test like this can help, as said, in terms of the learnings. Is it meeting the expectations of our users? Is it intuitive? What are any sticking points and challenges? But also, again, as talked before, the test review, so the retro of the test. Did users understand the prototype that we gave? Did they understand the task that we gave them as part of the test? Were the instructions clear for the unmoderated test? This helps us then validate the data and ensure that the insights that we're getting are relevant for the further development as well. As another example, we have essentially, we are updating the layout of a page, but have a couple of execution alternatives. So this brings us back to not just necessarily testing a fully fledged functional prototype, but actually testing those sketches and initial ideas of the executions. So we have a few options to see which one do the users prefer. So here again, we've identified that we have this usability issues with the current layout, have some improvement options, but now need to understand which ones do the users prefer, what are the difference between the two, which improves the experience the most, or what the next steps should really be. And one method to do this is essentially a preference test. Again, we recommend combining both qual and quant metrics here so that we're able to understand what the preference is between the given options, but also what is driving that preference. Why do they prefer a specific option? What are the highlights from that? How do they perceive for it to add value to them? And again, having the combination of the qual and quant here enables us to scale the test as well when needed, so we can have a larger user base testing the different options, and allows us to also then potentially look at the different user segments, how they differ. Are there difference between our user segments in terms of their preference of the potential execution? And the learnings from this is essentially understanding what the preference is, but the reasons why behind it as well. How do we improve the layout even further? Any sticking points and challenges come across? But again, here it's important to have the retro of the test itself. Is there a clear difference in terms of preference? What is it that we can learn for the future? Did people understand the difference between the options, for example, or was there confusion? Do we have enough insights to move on and develop the chosen option further, for example?
Great, thanks Lotta for sharing the 5 steps and also the 2 examples here on the end. I was a little bit scared there when you suddenly jumped off. If I would like to have been taken over. I see that there was a comment in the chat there with the joys of webinars and remote meetings. If anyone have any questions for Lotta during or from the 5 different steps or the examples, please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat to the right hand side. Before we're going into the Q&A, I would also like to encourage everyone to think about their own design process or development process and think about how they would like to involve your users on a more continuous basis. And to give some inspiration, I would like to share 2 different versions on this. One that we call the Hippo blueprint and the other one that we are calling the iterative learning blueprint. So starting with the Hippo blueprint, this means that the highest income paid person's opinion is the leading voice throughout the development or design process. As you can see here, the graph looks quite thin in terms of the user learnings, and the user learnings actually arrives as late as in the release stage, where you're actually putting things in front of your users. I would like to say that this is very risky and a little bit an unsure way of working and prioritizing your work ahead. Our other option and the continuous learning blueprint that I also mentioned before, the other hand, is what I think everyone should aspire to continuously involve users throughout opportunity stage, ideation, concepting, prototyping up until release, and make sure that you're increasing your user learnings along the way through all of these different steps. And what we think is that this also reduces a lot of risk in the development for both your team, for your company, and for your people, to make sure that everyone stands in or knows the conviction and has conviction in the way of working, and that the users actually are looking to solve the needs that you are offering them. If you want to create your own learning blueprint, there is a possibility for you to take contact with me or Lotta, and we're happy to help and look deeper into this together with you. I would also like to think a little bit about the Q&A. I can see that we're a little bit thin in terms of questions that have come up. So if you think about any questions, please ask them in the chat. But during that time, I might have a question for you, Lotta, and that's around the user groups. So how would you go about setting up a user group yourself?
So thinking about that advisory user group as part of the prototype testing process, the kind of the simplest way is essentially having an email list of your users that are interested in giving you feedback and that you can reach out to quickly and effectively to help you validate and test the prototypes that you have. The more enhanced solution is a community approach. So actually creating a testing community of your users to be able to engage them on a more continuous basis most effectively, and really kind of harness that iterative blueprint way of working, not just in the prototype testing phase, but across that development and design process.
Great. And like, what do you think about how many prototype tests you should do when like executing on a specific project or enhancement of a product or a service?
That depends very much on the prototype itself. So having those test reviews as part of the process is crucial. Did we get enough insights from the first prototype tests that we did to take it further and create the actual execution and move towards launch? Or do we still have some open questions, or do we need to make significant improvements or changes to the prototype? So does it warrant another round of testing? So it's important to have that iteration and learning as part of the testing as well, to be able to kind of see how many phases you have as part of the prototype testing phase.
Okay, thank you. And we got a question from Lars here in the Q&A tab. What are your thoughts about testing with internal colleagues, early adopters, and actual users, but that is non-customers, that are non-customers? How would these be optimally used in the testing blueprint?
Well, for example, if you think about internal colleagues or early adopters, they can be really relevant for if you don't quite yet have all the details specced out in the prototype, that it's still quite rough around the edges, where you need to have a more in-depth understanding to be able to grasp what is intended with the prototype. Then those target groups are really relevant for testing that, so that we're getting valid insights or valid data from those tests. But then on the other turn, it's important to understand again, what's the objective? Who are we trying to improve the experience for with what's being developed? So if it is non-customers, so if our objective is to essentially attract new users, then it's important to also test a prototype at some point with those potential users and getting their perspective. Is it really going to kind of pique their interest to start using your product, service, or feature as well? So going back to those objectives, and based on those determining who are the relevant target groups and adding then those into the blueprint and testing process.
Great. Hope that answered your question, Lars. We also got a question on what tools we are recommending for prototype testing.
The tools, again, I think this goes back to the objectives and the hypothesis. So really depends on what kind of questions you have about the prototype. But as said, we definitely recommend having the unmoderated and moderated as a combo as part of your process. So in where you're testing sort of large or smaller scale updates and things where you don't necessarily, the prototype isn't that complex, the unmoderated tests, for example, running a survey, or if you have a few sketches, doing the preference test as examples, or even having first click tests to gauge what piques users' interest when they see a layout, or where they expect to find certain information in a menu structure, for example, could be ways to run some quick tests. But then for the more complex prototypes, which require a bit more from the test itself, then your moderated tests become relevant, of doing the in-depth interviews, for example.
Great. We also got some book tips or book recommendations from Johan in the chat. One is The Lean Startup by Eric Rice, We at Lean Lab really like his methods on having the lean mindset. And also there was another mention here, which is called prototype it. I'm not sure about the if it's a misspelling or if it's my pronunciation that is weird. But that will I definitely be looking into as well. We're right on time, so I'll think that we should round off here and thank everyone for joining us today. The next time we are going to have a new webinar will be the 14th of February. That time we will do it on the theme of user-led ideation. Our colleague Anne just posted a link so that you can already now sign up if you're interested in that topic for the next session. Otherwise, thank you everyone for showing up. The recording will be sent to you after the call, and we're looking forward to see you again on the next webinar. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.